I could take the opportunity to introduce my panelists. We are mainly waiting um, to be linked to Dr. Ted Love, who is joining us from the US. But as you can see, I have a full panel here. And so I'm going to introduce them very quickly. I know some of them have asked me to elaborate on their CVs and profiles, to at least spend 30 minutes. As I said, I apologize for the late start, so I'm going to have to disappoint my comrades here. I'm going to start with my immediate left. We are very, very pleased and grateful to be joined by Professor Alfredo Vera Estrada from Cuba. He is from a company called LabioPharm, which produces animal vaccines and biological products. Of course, a lot of us here in this country and in the continent know the very strong relationships that we have with Cuba and the friendship that we've enjoyed over several decades. So it's an honor to be joined by Professor Vera today. And I suppose one could say the gentleman second right from me. So he's Cuban. Dr. Painter, Professor George Painter, is an old friend of ours of South Africa, having been involved in the innovation that led to the development of most of our antiretrovirals for HIV. And his work and the work at Emory has been phenomenal in reversing the devastation caused by antivirals. Over the next few days, we will be engaging with the Emory to develop a new type of partnership of global north, global south, collaboration with local universities, where we get to define the strategic agenda and what our priorities will be. And George Painter is the Executive Director of Emory, Drug Research and Innovation Adventures at Emory. And welcome to South Africa, George, again. I suppose we should call you an honorary citizen because you've been coming here for at least 30 years. And it's not an accident that next to him, we have our very own Dr. Stavros Nicolaou from Aspen Pharmacare, which I stand to be corrected is the biggest pharmaceutical company in Africa. And Stavros may share with us some of the work that demonstrate that profits can be matched with social goals and the role that Aspen played in enabling us in this country and in this continent to have access to affordable medicines, particularly HIV medicines. But I won't speak for him. And then at the very last, not the least though, in this panel session, the dialogue with global leaders is an apt dialogue, particularly at this point in time, having witnessed the devastation of vaccine nationalism during COVID. So he comes, he's Director General of the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, ICGEB, which is an interesting organization in that it makes its intellectual property available to all its member countries. And it was formed with an express intention of enabling access to high tech to countries in the global south. So Dr. Lawrence Banks is at the extreme. And on TV, last but not least, I see that he's joined us and is visible. We are joined by the chairman of the board of Bio International, which is the premier biotechnology association in the world, based in the US, Dr. Ted Love. He also has a lot of interesting and very, very witty mentions. Welcome, Ted, to this panel of global experts in biotechnology. This is a dialogue, which means that we do not present slides. We are having a conversation, and a lot of the conversation is really centered around the specific insights that these leaders have and that they've, the journeys that they've traversed over the past few decades. And I think with that, I would like to invite first, and he says, please don't throw me under the bus, but I am throwing him under the bus, Dr. Lawrence Banks, to maybe give us an opening remarks, particularly on the mission of the ICGP and its alignment to the intentions of BioAfrica and the Global South in general. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you very much, Noah. It really is it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation. What I'd like to do is just think briefly, if we look at the theme of this year's Africa Bio 23, which is reimagining biotechnology and innovation for Africa, for development and security. And I think it's those last two words that to me are really, really fundamental. And they were really brought very much into focus during the course of the pandemic. Development means development in terms of building local capacity. And security means freedom from outside supply chains. And as we all saw during the pandemic, we realized that Africa was really in a very extremely difficult situation. We saw lack of access to simple chemicals for doing RNA extraction. We saw lack of access to diagnostic kits that really you would consider pretty basic. Then, of course, as we moved through the pandemic, there was lack of access to therapeutics, and ultimately there was lack of access or very slow access to the vaccine. And so I think if we look at it in a global perspective, to attain development, security, local production is the key element, and this is what we have to be aiming for. And that can be not just in the context of health, it's equally relevant in agriculture, and it's also relevant for energy and energy security. And we see all of those aspects coming out in Africa Bio this year. If I was to put this in the perspective of ICGB, so we're an international organization. We work with almost 70 countries around the world. But a key mandate for us is to ensure access to the fruits of modern biotechnology and molecular biology for countries as part of our constituency. And really that all links to meeting the 2030 agenda on sustainable development. We don't have millions of dollars to invest in production of plant or large infrastructure, but where we tend to focus our energies is in the building of local capacity, especially human capacity. And one of our major aims in that is to aim for training, for fellowships, for both junior and senior research fellows. But a key emphasis in that is South-South cooperation. So ensuring that the training and the fellowships that we provide can also encourage interchange and exchange of ideas and techniques across the African continent. So that is a really important point for us. And I should stress that Africa for ICGB is extremely important. We have almost 30 countries as part of our membership who are on the African continent. One of the other elements in building that sustainability is ensuring that people will come back to Africa. You have some amazing researchers located throughout the world, but you need to get them home. You need to reverse the brain drain. And again, this is something where ICGB is very active in trying to provide support and access to facilities for young people want to come back and establishing their research programs here within Africa. And then obviously there is the direct tech transfer that Nalala just mentioned, which is ensuring and providing that IP, the access to biosimilars, biotherapeutics, so that it can be directly produced locally. And Professor Msomi mentioned high tech. That's great. We can do that and we help with that. But don't forget the low tech. The low tech can often be just as impactful. And we saw that very, very clearly in the pandemic, where diagnostics that are really powerful in a low resource environment where you have intermittent power supply can be just as effective as some of the high end technology. So one of the things that ICGB is also very keen to pursue is to provide local capacity in being able to produce basic enzymes, basic molecular biology tools, so that African populations can also develop independence in that sector. I think, obviously, the transfer of technologies that will produce therapeutics, such as biosimilars, is something that is really very close to our heart. And I think we've been really very successful in that in many parts of the world. And I'm really looking forward to being able to really drive this within Africa. Thank you, Nolan.
Thank you, Lawrence. I think since you've opened up the issue of innovation with impact, as opposed to high tech and cutting edge, I would like to pass on the mic to Prof next to me, because Cuba, by acclamation, is one of the best examples of how to use limited resources and apply them to innovation with a high social impact. We saw how they managed to come up with COVID vaccines, even with minimal resources. Maybe just give us a few ways of how Cuba has managed to participate meaningfully in biotechnology. But not only that, but to also manage to serve the interest of its society, as well as a lot of the global South countries. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you a few ideas. We are from Cuba, from the Cuban company Labiopharm, which deals mainly with veterinary vaccines and drugs. We were created in the 1960 only for producing veterinary vaccines and drugs. Later on, we have to diversify our productions, and we started to produce also biopesticides to control vectors for human health. It is to control mosquitoes, biolarvicides, to apply in the breeding sites of the mosquitoes. We developed a biological rodenticide to kill rats and mice, very specifically innocuous for the environment, a very valuable tool to kill rats and mice. Later on, we developed also in the field of biotechnology several products, biopesticides for agricultural use to control pests in the agriculture. We have biofertilizers, we have biostimulants for plants also. Even we had to develop a biological product coming from the venom of the Cuban scorpion to kill or to control or to help in the control of cancer in people. We are now working in partner here with the Toca Bio company. We are trying to develop with them, with our technologies, the veterinary vaccines, bacterial, viral vaccines for poultry, for beef, cattle, for horses, for any animal species that we produce in Cuba for a very long time. I have to say that in Cuba we have developed a very collaborative system between universities, between research institutes. We have, as veterinary producers, we have very high relations with all the companies that produce vaccines for human health. Even he has mentioned the COVID vaccines. It was developed also by our collaboration because we had before a coronavirus vaccines for pigs. And we were of big help in developing the COVID vaccines for humans. Okay, we are in the best mood to collaborate in the South global cooperation system with all the African countries. We have had many relationships with many African countries, mainly working to control malaria, because we have applied our biolarvicides to kill the mosquito larvae in many African countries, starting from Angola, Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, and many other African countries. We have proposed those products for South Africa, but they have not agreed to use it. It is their opinion. We are very respectful in that but we have many fields to collaborate with South Africa and with other African countries. We built in Tanzania a very big biofactory to produce their bioproducts for agricultural use and to produce there the biolarvicides for malaria control. And really, we are very happy to be here and to have the opportunity to share with you our minimal knowledge in the biotechnology field. Thank you very much for having the patience to hear us.
Thank you. I think that's a cue for me to switch over to another place in the Western Hemisphere. If we could get Dr. Ted Love. Once again, good evening this side, Dr. Love.
Good evening.
Dr. Love is the chairman of Bio International, which used to be Bio USA. And we're very grateful for you taking the time to join us. I know this is your second dialogue with global biotech leaders, but I want you to be a bit provocative. You work in an area of neglected diseases. As much as you are in the global north, you've always worked in the area of sickle cell disease, which is prevalent in this part of the world. Just as a way of joining the conversation, any words around the collaboration between Bio International and Bio Africa? I do not know whether Dr. Love is online.
Can you hear me? Dr. Msame? Dr. Msame, can you hear me?
If he's not online, I will hop over to Professor George Painter. He tells me he's been paid to become a professor. Has Ted joined us?
Dr.
Oh, Ted
Dr.
has
Msome,
joined
can you hear me?
us. I was being provocative, Ted, tracing back your recent history in global blood therapeutics, as well, looking at the the contradictions of being in a global north country and having neglected diseases. Running an organization that deals with the big pharma issues or the big biotech issues. Any insights or comments on how these collaborations could work uh, between parties from the global south and global north? Over to you, Ted.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Msome and the organizers for inviting me to participate. Second, I want to apologize. I'm dressed very informally because I'm on vacation and I'm not even at a house where I have clothes to match up with my colleagues. So I apologize for that. To your point about a neglected disease, I think many of us know that many of the products in our industry and medicine, the innovative products, literally require billions of dollars of investment in order to make a product. And what drives the interest in doing that in the U.S., honestly, is at the early stages, I think interest in science at our academic institutions and ultimately in industry, it's the drive to make a profit. Um, Sickle cell disease really suffered in both arenas, at the NIH and also in many of the government agencies in the West. There was really very little investment in finding an innovative solution for sickle cell disease. And likewise in industry, there had been very little investment in that. So it was about 2014 that I got involved with a venture group that told me that they had put $50 million to start a company that could focus on a very innovative therapy for sickle cell disease. In fact, the idea was to try to make something that would be equivalent to a bone marrow transplant or gene therapy, but do so in a pill format because we knew that for most of the world, most of the patients around the world with sickle cell disease, the idea of doing something like a bone marrow transplant would not be practical. So without going into a lot of the details, we basically were trying to chemically modify sickle hemoglobin into hemoglobin that would not polymerize and would stop the cells from sickling, which is the proximate and fundamental driver of sickle cell disease. We were ultimately very successful at doing that. And I think, as you know, our company was acquired for about $6 billion last October by Pfizer. But it's a great story in that it does require a lot of money to make a product. We were fortunate that there was a venture group that was willing to put in the initial $50 million. I ultimately was able to raise from investors who I convinced that this could be profitable. I raised about 1.5 billion to build Global Blood. And obviously everyone was very successful. Most importantly, we did make a therapy which is now available increasingly around the world. And we have actually a second generation product that I think will be pretty much curative of sickle cell disease. I'm hopeful that that data will continue to look as robust as what I've seen in that product as a follow-on product to the initial product that was approved. Maybe I'll end with one other thing, just kind of with my chairman of bio hat on. My goal as chairman of bio is to support the ecosystem for innovation, because we do think that innovation is the way to make a healthier society, to fight disease, to feed people, to develop biosecurity, to make energy in a cleaner way, to make our environment sustainable. There are a lot of forces, at least in the US, that often are well-intentioned, that fundamentally undermine innovation. And so I spent a lot of my time focusing on making sure that legislators and leaders understand what we need to really protect innovation around the world. Also, with my bio hat, I will say that I would like to see the innovation culture spread around the world. And I've listened to the comments of many of my colleagues already about Africa. Me being of African descent, I'm particularly hopeful that Africa can continue to develop and grow and do some of the things that we've heard about in Cuba, do some of the things that we've seen in Asia and China in terms of continuing to grow the industry. And it is my desire in my position to do anything I can do to support BioAfrica's efforts.
Thank you. I'd like to cross over to Dr. Love, Ted. Again, with one of my provocations. I'm always intrigued by the fact that the US, as a developed global north country, has some demographic profiles that are literally the same as the global south, as Africa. You spoke about global blood therapeutics. And I'm just intrigued or want to explore that a little further as a motive force or a driver for collaboration between the continent and the US, for example, innovators. Any words on that?
Yeah, I'm not completely sure if I understand the question, but I'll take a little bit of an attempt. The US is a very big country, and a lot of the issues that we're talking about in terms of global problems, we have them in parts of the US. There are issues of lower access to innovative therapies in the US, for example, in the South, in Black communities. And a lot of the things probably have to do with some of the overlap, maybe with some of the global issues. I think, one of the things that I was thinking as I listened to this is incentives. People do things that they feel an incentive to do. And we need to make sure that there are incentives to deal with some of the issues in the US, and there are incentives to deal with some of the global issues that we've been talking about. The other is infrastructure. There is really a poor infrastructure in some parts of the US, and my suspicion is infrastructure is part of the issue with many of the global issues that we're talking about. So I do think that one of the things that I've been thinking about, and I was thinking about at GBT, is building a plant, or building plants in Africa to make our product that would be available to Africans there. GBT does not exist anymore, but I thought that would be something that would be important for us to do as a company. And hopefully other companies will begin to think that way, because it wouldn't just be building a company that would make our product, it would be building the infrastructure that could be expanded and adapted to many products, present day and in the future. The other is barriers. There are some barriers, and we've talked about regulatory. There are a lot of barriers to making things accessible in parts of the US. And I think we've been hearing that there are barriers to making things available globally, some regulatory, for example. So, I really would love to see us take a few examples of success. Maybe HIV is an example of where we've had some degree of success and see us just begin to build on those and roll those out. But I think, the panel has really pointed out a lot of the problems. I think a lot of the problems, as you maybe were alluding to, have overlap geographically in the US, but I think many of the things are certainly unique in terms of the borders and the things that others have identified. So, I would really come back to, I'd love to see us come up with a pilot program, some projects where we've shown a capacity to deal with HIV, may be example, diabetes may be an example, and really make sure that we build the infrastructure in Africa to be able to deal with those issues locally. And we've got to figure out the incentives that would make all the people that are required to do that want to do that.
Thank you, Ted. As you can tell, the technical team is whispering in my ears to close. So I think the honor of the last word, 2 minutes, goes to my good old friend Stavros to tie up the conversation, particularly with regards to how we move forward, leveraging innovation for Africa's development and security. 2 minutes, Stav.
Yeah, so I'm not going to incur your wrath at this time of the night. So I'm going to actually make it in 1 minute. I presented a 3-point plan earlier, right, which is not new. The issue around all of these plans, we never execute on them. So I think what's needed here is the courage of conviction. We do need to set up our own capacities and capabilities on the continent. Now, there's a good start. The Africa CDC are driving this. My good friend, Dr. Nikes, I think he's in the room somewhere. I saw him at the back. What we have to do is, as a global community, we've got to stay vigilant around supporting these local and regional capacity building exercises. But more importantly, we've got to sustain them in future. Because a world that is health insecure is a world that will never see peace and security, global peace and security. So my final message is less talking, more doing. And we do need the global community to support these initiatives through actions and deeds. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stav. And I think with that,
Was that 2 minutes?
it was 10 minutes. I was counting, I'm joking. Thank you, Stav. I think with that, I'd like to thank my esteemed panelists for these insights. Obviously, it's too short a time. These conversations and these dialogues have to continue. And I'm grateful for that, for making time available. And I'd like to thank you as the audience for sitting through my catastrophic facilitation. You should give yourself a big watch, warm applause but thank you for making time. I know people are hungry and the dinner is going to be served in the hall next door. And we'll see you tomorrow. Those of you who want to go to the dinner in hall 3, I'm told by if it's not hall 3, it's not my fault. It's the fault of those guys. And fortunately, they've proven themselves by not being able to set up the technology properly on time. And thank you, guys. The meeting or the session is, I almost said it's adjourned. You can tell I'm used to the meeting is adjourned, but it has been a very insightful. And I hope that we will continue this dialogue throughout the conference, the next 3 days. It's a business conference, and so make time to meet colleagues from all over the world, from all over the continent. I'm certain that they also want to meet all of you. Thank you.